Well, here we are on the second part of the KZ650 restoration. And so, as you can see, a lot of stuff has been removed. Basically, I'm trying to strip down to the frame. And I came up with a little issue that I didn't see. Look at that rear wheel. That rear wheel is cocked to the left at the top. So I had this apart, and as you can see, I really cleaned up that rear swing arm. And so what I did is I leveled the frame, and then I took a secondary measurement, or reading you might say, down here, and we're within the two marks with the bubble. But I had this rear wheel off, and right on this perch here, that level would sit and it would cross over, and it was 1/8 of a bubble or more off. So I was trying to figure out, I mean, you can see the offset, it's much closer to the left shock absorber, and this is like center. That's like center in the frame. I mean, we're quite a ways off. In reality, we're right about there. So we're like a 1/2 inch down here off. So I think that's a bent swing arm. And luckily, I talked to the parts manager, Chico, and he informed me that I had this other KZ650 of the same vintage. It's either a 77 or a 78. Chico! And it's got the same style brake, drum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this apart, and it'll kind of eliminate one more out in the boneyard. So I'm going to just pull it apart down to the frame, carry the frame off, engine, store it somewhere. It could sit outside. It's really had its day. But this swing arm and this wheel is centered. Now the fender doesn't seem straight to me. It seems a little off. It seems a little off that way. But looking at the way that the shocks and the way it sits straight up and down, I've leveled this, and that rear tire is straight. So I'm going to remove this swing arm, and then I will put this swing arm into the project bike, and we'll see what happens. I'm going to remove all of the rest once I get the swing arm figured out and get that. I don't want to restore a bent frame. Okay, the motor's out, rear wheel's off. This is the parts bike. So we are level, and if we take this and slide it in, we're level. It's a little, I'd say a little off to the right, just hugging that right hairline. And now we're going to put it on the back of the swing arm on the perch. And I'd say it's just touching the line. So This seems a lot straighter. So let's hope when I get this off, this swing arm off, and clean it up and mount it on the other frame, that we get a straight rear wheel. So the parts bike is completely broke down now, right down to the frame. And I'm sure I'll use at least half a dozen nuts or bolts or parts or something from this. And then of course, it is some other parts. It is the moment of truth. All right, so that bubble, you may not be able to see it, but it's just a hair to the right. Actually, if I straighten this, that's pretty center. And now if I take it, slide it in, that's like almost perfectly straight. The moment of truth. Did we have a bent swing arm? Or is there something else going on? Yeah, it's in the middle. We had a bent swing arm. Now it's a hair to the left and the top's a hair to the right. And when I took the middle measurement, it was dead nuts. But another thing that led me to believe it was a bent swing arm was these shocks did not come out very easy. The bolt had some pressure, some resistance from tweaking, one part of the swing arm, one arm of the swing arm is up higher than the other, so it didn't allow these to just thread up easily, and it did here. So what a great stroke of luck to have a parts bike it's a 77, but they're identical swing arms. I don't know about the bearings. The other was a brass bushing in the 78, so I would assume that the 77 is going to be a brass bushing too, because they went from brass to needle bearings. So what a great help that all was to have that bike. Now we can move forward in taking this motor out, getting the frame off, doing what I just did on the parts bike, and starting to prep the frame for paint. So I'm not showing you every step of the way on this because it's in my other videos. But what I did do is I did a little polishing just by hand on that. It's the only side cover that I really would like to not have to take off if I could help it. Everything else really doesn't have much of gaskets or has to seal all that well. So I'm going to try to get by with that cover. So the motor's out. We corrected the swing arm problem. So now got to get the front end off of it and get the frame and all the frame pieces ready for paint. The swing arm has been cleaned up, and this swing arm, go figure. I don't know if you can see in there, but yeah, there you go. This swing arm has roller bearings. So I cleaned them up, and I noticed that this shaft, the one side, to me that's acceptable. We're not doing high speed, but we do have stress, lateral stress on these. And so this one side, it's wasted. You can almost see the speed bumps in it from the bearings. And look at the pitting in there. And I'm sure that it's this side. I'm pretty sure it's this side. Can you hear that? If I get just, that's a little rough for me. Now, you know, if this was just a bike that, I don't want to say just a bike, but I would put this back together and just ride it. You know, but while you got it out and the parts are still available, you know, get it right. This is the, I guess you want to call this the bushing. This was out of the other bike that had the, well, basically it's out of the bike that I'm working on, where this is the swing arm out of a parts bike. The parts bike I pulled apart, but this was the straight swing arm. So this is going on to the current project bike, and I'd already marked this for parts. But even though this is roller bearings, this shaft most likely is the same. Now the bolt goes through the center of it just right, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure it with a caliper. So what I have here, and I don't know if you can see, twenty-one 2165. That's on the bushing style, and 2166. So this is the same. So I know this side is a little rough. But the other side, and you can feel it with your fingers, the other side much better, right? I'm going to live with these. And probably could live with the other ones if they were nice and lubed up. But I just happened to go into my bag of parts, and you know, if you're going to do this, when I first started doing the channel, and I kept saying to myself, you know, order a couple when you're ordering, right? Look what I have here. KZ650 bearings, even have the outside seals, but these are just dust seals, and then these cleaned up so nice that I'm not going to worry about those. But also have these little seals, and I'm going to have to look at the fish, see what these are for. It probably has something to do. So it probably has something to do with the swing arm, maybe not. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to retain these two. We're going to replace these. You can hear that. You can hear that they're loose. And the back one seems okay. It seems like just this front one. But I don't know if I can get just one out. So let's see what we can do with that. So Chico, the parts manager informed me that these are the correct bearings. So I just wanted to, you know, have the parts manager ring in He is a Chief fan, as you can see. So let's see if we can get those other ones out. And Chico's going to be going to the parts manager convention. You know, that it's for the parts managers. They have to be Chihuahuas, and there's probably going to be a few thousand there. They're going to discuss, you know, new software and other things that, you know, parts managers always tend to, you know, do. And then who knows what shenanigans he's going to get into. He's already shaken just thinking about it. So let's get these bearings out and see if we can put this back together. So after really cranking this down, it's like it's in between sizes. And let me show you what these are. These expand as you crank this in, and so you try and find the one that fits the hole as close as possible, which is this one. It still is in there pretty loose, and I couldn't get behind the inner. There's two bearings here. I couldn't get behind the inner, and I heated this up, but it's finally, as you can see, it's finally starting to come out. And there it is. All right, so it's out, and on further inspection, it's missing a roller bearing in there. Yeah, missing a roller bearing. Now it could be on the floor, as much as I was pounding on it, but I don't think so. I don't know. But this is the noisy one. There's another roller bearing. So now it's missing two. But the one that's still inside, this one feels good. So if I take the shaft here, to me that's acceptable. Like I said, we're not going any high speeds. It's just lateral movement. And then the other bearing, the new bearing, will probably give it a little additional support in case it's a little warm where this side. So there we have it. We're going to go ahead and install the outer bearing over here. Alright, so I'm putting this back in, and I think in the background you're hearing George Gammon, the economist. So don't worry about that. I don't think I'm going to get a copyright infringement from that. But here's what I've done. I've taken the old bearing,
I really appreciate you guys being so active.
the shaft.
It's really super cool.
Here's the new bearing.
Back and forth,
I've already got it in there a little ways.
Oh, here we go. What is your view on emerging economies during this turmoil, especially?
And so what
countries like
we're going to
India?
do is we're going to be
What are the opportunities?
tapping on the old bearing, so that the new bearing doesn't have,
and
you know, any
I
direct
think long term, I would see
kind of
some
awkward or off center
tailwind.
pressure.
Shorter term, I think it's
see
anybody's
that.
guess. But what I will say is, if you look at end with
So this,
on his Endgame podcast and several others,
we are there.
and he has
Bearings
he
in,
studied passive investing quite extensively.
shafts
And
acceptable.
He really lays out a quite strong argument for, and I won't.
You get all that lubed up, and
explain
we're going to
this,
be
it's
golden.
very difficult to explain, but
We're getting there. Got all this taken apart, and it looks like somebody has been in there with some duct tape. So there's probably an issue there. And of course it runs through the handlebars. That makes it difficult. This is all disconnected. It's all ready to slide in through there. So we'll get these off the bars before I pull the bars. That way I don't have to hold the bars to pull or push or whatever I'm gonna have to do to get them out. So we'll get those out, and then I'm gonna bench this and see if our switches are working, because it wouldn't start by the starter button. I'm gonna guess that there's something going on right there. Someone had monkeyed with the sheathing, and I'm talking about the plastic that covers the wires so that it'll slide out of that, really, I'd say, incredibly small hole from up here. And what ended up happening is it gathered inside and there was just no way to get it out. I stripped and stripped. Plus, somebody had been in here now. Some of this is what I did, but this taped up mess here, it just didn't survive the takeout, so I'm gonna have to look for another one of those. The frame prep starts with just some of the purple power and a brush. You clean things, 2 or 3 times, but I'm using a small screwdriver here just to check, make sure. I've seen people paint over grease, and I've probably been guilty of it too. It just, it'll cover it, and it's not the end of the world. It's a frame, but you think it might be rust, and it's a big old glob of, look at this right here. That's looks like grease, but yeah, some of it is. Look at that. There we go. And some of it's the weld. So you do your best, and you get as much of it as off as you can. And 2 or 3 washings with the brush. Then we'll start with some sanding, and or just Scotch-Brite, just to get a little dull surface for the paint to adhere to, and try to get everything as clean as you can. So I'm going to be using the chassis shield, and this is the semi-gloss, and I'm also going to start with 220 sandpaper. So 220, then 320. This is probably the worst piece on the bike, and this is after 220, a little hand sanding. Just get it kind of flat. I know it really doesn't show, but it does. So next is 320, and we're going to do this with every black piece. All right, so that's after 320 and ready to paint. Now that chassis shield goes right over, it says right on the can, it goes right over raw metal, so there's no priming, none of that. And if you really want my opinion, I've painted a lot of frames with it, you can really paint over rust. It's not that big a deal, but you just want to knock it down. Of course, I'm sure there's a little rust somewhere. You can see a little rust in there. It'll cover it, it'll coat it, and it's going to stick. So you have to do this with all the rest of them. This is the worst, and the frame is actually going to be easier than just this one piece. This battery box is really bad. So what I'm doing is I'm using the moto tool But this is the first thing I'm using. Then I'm going to use the wire. And I should be able to get all of it off of there. Okay, I got the battery box, the front triple clamps or top triple clamps, the swing arm, kickstand, center stand, all cleaned and prepped. And now it's time for the frame. And there's a lot of grease still in here, so I've got to really clean it. But like I said, this doesn't have all that much rust spots. There's a big area here. I'll be able to grind that out real quick, and right in here. And you know, a lot of this is from those lead acid batteries, and so I've just been lately putting in the absorbed glass mat, and ABM, I think, or absorbed AGM batteries. Those things never leak, so this won't happen again, because this is all due to battery acid. All that, it's hard to see because of the light. All this is battery acid, and the battery box just took me 2 hours. Well, maybe an hour and a half. So let's get this thing clean. All right, everything's clean, sanded, and then the last step is to wipe it down. With degreaser. Get it all nice, especially the areas that are going to show. Now, the new motorcycle rider, he grabbed this thing without washing his hands, so I'm wiping it down extra careful, because he'd feel real bad, he said, if the paint came out bad. So I'm making sure and getting it nice and clean. All right, so 2 wet coats later of Summit Chassis Shield, and it's brand new frame time. All brand new. Brand new frame. It's a little difficult to spray, but not bad. As far as difficult, I mean, you know, you got to get every corner. You know, a lot of paint goes up in the air. I think I mixed 8 ounces and then an additional 6 ounces of totally mixed product. And the second coat really is necessary. Your first coat doesn't come out looking as shiny and beautiful as this. It's the second coat that really kind of makes it. And like I said, I really focus on the areas that I'm going to see. At the bottom of this, no one's going to see that. It's going to have a battery in it. And then the bottom of this, I just misted it with a coat. You can see there's no need to completely coat that. It'll get completely rubbed off. But that is right where you're going to see it. It needs to be finished really nicely. Same with the handlebar mounts. And looking good. So now I'm going to let this probably dry for at least overnight, but probably a couple of days, so that I don't get fingerprints in it carrying it onto the stand. In the meantime, we'll be continuing to look for a seat, which is getting hard to find, and we're going to have a hard time finding some of the other parts. I have looked at some of the places that you guys have recommended, and I found a couple of parts, but try and find a 650 seat that, you know, has good foam is all I'm asking. You know, my seat's got the step foam, the pan is good, but the seat foam, I'd have to find a foam and a seat cover. So I've got a couple different ways to go, and we'll let this sit for a few days, and this will probably be the end of section 2. And what I'm going to ask is a painting question, and I'm going to go to the computer for that. All right, so the question is, do I go with the stock paint job? And this is a really good picture of what it would look like. You can see the stripe package. You barely see it there, but there's a stripe on that. And it's not a bad looking color, but it just doesn't have anything. I mean, it's you know, a result of the period. And what I've done is I did this paint scheme on a KZ650 on an older one, and the thing came out really nice. This is it here, and you can see how I had to stripe everything out, but that's basically the color scheme. Now I would do it a little bit different, but not much. So my question is do I do the green Eddie Lawson, which if anyone ever wanted to repaint the bike, it wouldn't be the end of the world to just pull the plastic pieces and the tank off and paint them the orange and put the stripe kit on. I mean, they could do that. They could always go back. I'm not going to change the bike or paint the engine or anything like that. So do I go with the stock color, or do I go with the Eddie Lawson green? So there's your choices. Please ring in if you want. Let me know what your preference would be, and that'll help me make a decision. So this will be the end of part 2, and it's probably going to be at about a 4-parter. So again, you want the Eddie Lawson green or the stock, kind of a burnt orange. So it's out there. Give me your opinion.